I'm Assemblymember Latrice Walker of New York State's 55th Assembly District.
And I am Reverend Dr. Robert Waterman, pastor of Antioch Baptist Church in Brooklyn.
And
And we are Church and State.
In today's episode of the Church and State podcast, we're going to dissect the results of the 2024 election. What role did religion play as Americans cast their ballots? How about the issue of abortion? What about immigration? Let's get into it. The results of the election are in, and America has decided. President-elect Donald Trump defeated Vice President Kamala Harris by a resounding margin of 312 to 226 in the Electoral College. He swept the so-called swing states, including Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Michigan. He's the first convicted felon ever elected to the White House. No doubt, there were many reasons why Trump won. Some say voters trusted him on the economy. Some say Harris couldn't distinguish herself from President Biden. Others supported Trump's hardline stance on immigration. But for the purposes of this podcast, we're going to take a look at the role of religion in Trump's victory. Were the election results a rejection of Harris's messaging around reproductive rights and an affirmation of Trump's pro-life stance? Reverend Waterman, what are your thoughts?
I believe that it's a plethora of many reasons why Trump came out with the victory. We can deal with a lot of issues that the Democrats have not addressed, especially for the religious community as a whole, that there seems like there's been a far left imposing on the cultural, as we say, cultural and social issues of Christianity or Christians as a whole, or religious people as a whole. And we can deal with our Islamic brothers and sisters, our Jewish brothers and sisters, our Christian brothers and sisters, and all those of the other faith. Faith plays a major part in the things that we do. And so when we deal with issues that Trump positioned himself to really speak to the issues of abortion, religious freedom, and traditional family issues, those things are something that the religious community actually deems as values that Democrats have not addressed. And so when you start pushing the far left issues on that group of people, we might not come out and say it, but they said it in their vote. The vote was cast that if you don't speak to the totality of our communities, then you will not be elected. And that 312 to 226 really demonstrated from a perspective that over 70-something% of our religious community voted for Trump that deals with the issues. Everybody get caught up in the cancel culture. And that cancel culture, to a point, I want to cancel the cancel culture, because the fact is that the cancel culture tell people that if you don't believe what I believe, we're going to cancel you. And that's not from a Christian perspective, that we have values, family values, that is going to be sustainable. We speak that, we believe that, because it's biblical religious teaching that helps us to really be sustainable in our society and become the people that we are. So I believe that there are some of those things that the Democrats did not address. I know we deal with the economy, we deal with the migrants, but if you're talking about Christians, there are key issues that are circled around why do we vote the way we vote, and that really is religious freedom, abortion, and traditional family values.
Well, I think you made an interesting point, right? So you said religious freedom. And quite frankly, are we really talking about freedom? I know one of the biggest issues is the freedom of women to be able to make choices over their bodies, and the freedom to be able to come to those decisions based on the circumstances that surrounded their pregnancies to begin with. I wouldn't necessarily call this a far left sentiment. I just believe that, there are many circumstances that requires women to have to make those choices. And we were allowed many of those freedoms under the Roe versus Wade decision. We saw an overturning of that decision under this Supreme Court. It was an attack and it was an affront on women, not just from particular socioeconomic status, not just from a particular race, but just women in general. And so we talk about cancel culture. And quite frankly, there are many ways or beliefs that many women feel like when it comes to this conversation, they are being canceled. And religion is utilized as the weapon in order to appropriate the canceling of many of the freedoms that they believe that they enjoyed.
So when we deal with that word freedom, we're looking at to be free, do you cancel the other people's freedom, right? So we're saying freedom, yes. Women do have the freedom to do whatever they want with their bodies. I do believe that. But even from a Christian perspective, before you even get to the abortion, there is a freedom to be intimate. And how are you intimate? So when we talk about freedom, we're talking about a sense of, yes, your body belongs to you. Granted, there are cases where abortion might be needed. Rape. We could go down the line and name incest and all of that stuff that comes in when we know if it's going to take somebody's life. Yes, that's different and separate from just doing abortions. The first thing about freedom is that you have to restrain yourself. You have the freedom to sleep with whoever you want, but you got to pull it back. If you do that part, which is the values and the morals that people speak and think about themselves. And I know that women get caught up into circumstances of being free and giving themselves away. But even with that freedom, how much do you actually understand that word freedom?
But do you? Right?
I don't know.
Do
you
we
tell
have
me.
autonomy sometimes in our sexual experience? There are many circumstances where there are women who are married, for instance, and their partner, their spouse, has a certain level of an economic advantage over them. You know, either you're going to have sex with me or ... I'm not going to pay the rent. I'm not going to, take care of whatever the necessities that you may have of life. And many men utilize this as an opportunity for women to have to give of their bodies. Hey, you are my wife. You are my partner. You must, as a part of this partnership, provide, sexual intercourse with me as a matter of staying with me.
No,
and if you don't do this with me, then I'm going to leave you.
I understand that, but that is a part of the marital conversation that happens in the beginning during counseling, because the Bible says, the scripture says, that your body is no longer yours, nor is my body mine. So that's both parties. It's not because he has economic advantage over her and she doesn't have. When you go into a marriage, you make a covenant. You don't do a contract. The problem that people are having, they go in with contracts, not covenant. Covenants are different from a contract. A covenant you not make only to the person, but you make it to God. A contract is when you are just saying, because he has this, how many gold diggers do we have? If we want to go up that street to really talk about if the man has and the woman don't, and she decides to say, if I know how to get him through my body, that could be a gold digging situation. That she didn't marry him because she loved him. She didn't marry him because she cared about him. She married him because of his substance, what he has, right? He could be the poorest sex person and he could be non-intimate and he might not have what she wants sexually, but yet she's in a relationship because of the money. So let's not go down that road about the woman want the money and that he has the money and he's using the money as a carrot to tingle for sex. He could go buy it. He don't need it as a wife. He can go to the streets and get it with his money if that's the case. But the idea of marriage is totally different than women just going out here and having sex with men.
Right. I'm not talking just about money. It's just sometimes in certain circumstances, whether you're married or you're not married, there is a certain level of economic domestic violence that gets perpetuated against women each and every day. And at the end of the day, whenever it comes down to it, many times there are women who may not just want to have sex in that particular moment for whatever the circumstances are. But as a byproduct of the relationship, the man will say, you know what, if you're not giving it to me, then I'm not giving you X, Y, and Z. And so many women who are probably amongst our listening audience might have even had sex with someone last night who that they lay in the bed with every night that they didn't want to. And at the end of the day, it also could be a modicum of actual physical domestic violence where, this person is, beating on me every other day or every day and may have done so this morning. And as a way of him saying, you know what, I'm sorry, baby, I love you, let's have sex. And who wants to be a part of that situation as well? And then they're forced into this situation. And then there's a baby, which comes as a product of the sexual intercourse that they are engaged in. And now it's up to the woman to be able to decide, what am I going to do in this circumstance?
Gotcha.
Do I want to bring a child into this situation?
I feel you on that, but let's go back to there's a difference between someone who is religiously connected to God in some manner through their experience and practice of religion versus those who don't. Right? So now you have two collective of people. Not saying that the person who is religious is going to always be right and might not carry out the same deeds. But the question that we must ask is that, is there a difference between somebody who has religious values versus somebody who doesn't? How they would treat one another? Because according to my understanding with religion is that we have a sense of covenant to God. So therefore, we're always thinking about, and that's how I deal, thinking about if I treat my wife wrong, then God will get me. So therefore, I'm always conscious, not the law, but a greater power than the law, right? That says, even though I don't get caught by the law, God saw me. So I won't do certain things because God is watching. Now, the law, for those who are ungodly, per se, the law has to catch them. And the only way that it can, and because she has rights, her job is to, if I'm in an abusive situation, you got to get out of it. You don't sit there until death knocks at your door. But then she's looking at a couple of things. One, I love him. Two, I don't know what to do because I've never done anything. I married myself into a situation where he was the sole provider, and therefore I don't have nothing if I leave. So when women get caught up into that without a counselor, see, in counseling, when I do counseling, even in marital situations, my job is to put everything on the table. How much money do you both make? If the woman makes more than him, her expectation is not, when I get married, he's going to make more than me. I'm going to push him. I'm going to mold him. I'm going to make him into the man. No, if you married a couch potato, guess what? In 10 years from now, there might be a situation where he's still a couch potato. But you said you didn't marry him for the economics. You married him because you love him.
Yeah,
and
but
most
a lot
people
of times
know
turn that love into something else.
But most people know who they married when they get into a relationship. Even boyfriend, girlfriend. Whatever you are does come out. And it's our job to notice it and to discern it. That's why, from a Christian perspective, you got to tie God in it. If you leave God out of your relationship choices, there's 9 times out of 10 you might get a devil.
Well, I know there are lots of women who went to church every Sunday, prayed to God 3-4 times a day,
and went out in the street and got somebody from the street.
But it did not stop her mate, her partner, her spouse from picking up the stick at her each and every day.
Because 80% of the women that go to church are not married to men who go to church.
Well, that can be said, but that's not necessarily the case. And so, at the end of the day, there's that part where there's economics, there's the other part where there's physical domestic violence, but then there's also that emotional violence that a lot of times women find themselves into. And in addition to that, there's a level of intellectual violence that women find
And I'm
themselves
sensitive
into.
to all of the violence that happened to women. But the idea, again, there has to be some type of standard. It has to be some type of guidance in order for her to coexist and him to coexist. If there is no standard and guidance in any relationship, that means anybody could do whatever they want to do. Right? The state says here that in order for you to actually say you're married, you have to go down to the state and get a marriage certificate.
That goes
In
the
other
contract that you're
cultures,
talking
that's
about,
the contract
right?
that the
That
state
you wanted
puts.
to leave off the table.
But no, I didn't say leave it off the table.
There
I
is a
said
contract.
there is a contract based upon the state. Now, the state don't teach you how to love that woman, nor does the state teach you how to take care and provide for that woman. That state, all the state says is that you two agreed that you will abide in the same space sometime, and that you were connected at one point together. The state doesn't give you any guidance on how to be married, how to love each other, how to be family, how to be good mothers, how to be good fathers. The state doesn't give you any of that. And that's why the state, tell me what the state gives you.
Well, there are a number of things that would result in a divorce, right?
And that the state now gets involved on the separation of property, the separation of money, but the state still didn't teach you how to coexist together. Legislation does not teach you how to love.
Well, we cannot legislate morality.
Yes.
That's one of the things that we blanketly succumb to.
But this council culture is pushing legislation to try to regulate people's morality, saying that because you don't agree with this person, everything is not, quote unquote, I don't like you. Some things is I just don't agree with you. And this council culture that the state, the democratic state processes are pushing people to the far left to say if you don't agree with the way their lifestyle is, then we're going to cancel you.
Well, I will say that there's a few things that the contract does require.
Go ahead. Tell me what the contract
there
requires.
There are certain grounds for divorce.
Okay, tell me. Give me the grounds for love.
And inhumane punishment. And the contrary to that is if you are not treating me in a way that is uncruel and in a way that is humane, then that is an opportunity for us to be able to cancel this contract. Since
it's in the covenant. It's in the covenant.
There's also the idea of abandonment. A man is not allowed to just walk away from his wife and act as if she does not exist. Then there's the concept of imprisonment. Then there's also the concept of adultery. And so there are a number of irreconcilable, irretrievable breakdown in the relationship for a period of at least 6 months. So there are a number of things that the law subscribes to that you must abide by as a married couple. And if you do not abide by those rules, then you have essentially broke this contract, and in your breach of the contract, now is an opportunity to be able to get out of it. So there are certain things that are prescribed within the law with respect to how a marriage should function.
Well, that's covered under one covenant. Love your wife as Christ has loved the church. That's the covenant that's come. That means that you have to love your wife as yourself. See, when somebody's under a covenant, I don't treat myself wrong. I take care of me. And when you take care of you, you take care of your wife. You take care of your husband. How can two walk together unless they agree? So the agreement of the contract that says underneath the covenant that if I'm not agreeing to walk with this person to death do us part, to Genesis where the Bible talks about the scripture that says simply that you must leave your mother and your father and cleave to your wife and your husband and you become one flesh. Again, the covenant covers all of that. But you in the contract are trying to stipulate and you are trying to legislate love. Love is not legislated. You cannot write it down and put it in a contract and expect people to live up to it when they don't have a covenant with God first and then with each other.
So I think that, the law doesn't legislate love, but love is a concept. And there are certain ideals, there are certain characteristics, there are certain things that you have to do in order to show and express your love for this person. And if you are, putting me in a situation where during a process that we're supposed to be, together and with one another, not all men believe in this covenant or follow the covenant each and every day. One of the things that we know as Christians, if there is an opportunity where we are amongst, we're acting in our imperfect selves, that we can go back to God and ask him for forgiveness of our sins. And so no one is operating in a perfect space each and every day, whether you are man and or woman. So that being said, if there is a byproduct of whatever the circumstances are, there's a sexual relationship that takes place, a child is born, and a mother makes a decision as to whether or not she wants to continue along in this pregnancy, a woman should have the opportunity to be able to choose. But we saw just a taking of that with respect to this most recent Supreme Court. And we know that whenever it is that the federal government does not act, that it comes up to the state to be able to protect the citizens within that state. And so I was proud that one of the proposals that was on the ballot this year was about those same reproductive rights and reproductive freedoms, which was the Equal Rights Amendment, which passed overwhelmingly on the ballot in the state of New York, notwithstanding whether or not there were different stances between Vice President Harris and President-elect Donald Trump on the national ballot.
And, point taken. But here it is. I was sitting here and I was wondering, what percentage of black women do abortion versus white women? See, I believe that there's a genocide that's happening when white America push issues that black people go along with. Because I don't believe a lot of white women get abortions. I believe black, Hispanic, and Asian in America, I believe it's the woman of color that they focus on when they start talking about legislations. And I know I might be out of the pocket on this, but I need you guys to really take a deep dive into what percentage of women actually get abortions. And then you would see that there's a genocide that's being taken place throughout America that says pushing this abortion thing. Because in the black community, when a girl got pregnant in the South, the mama or the grandmama took the baby. There was no such thing as running and get an abortion. The baby was raised up with their mother as though that they were cousins, aunties, sisters, and brothers, because we didn't believe, even in our culture, believe that abortion was an option. All of a sudden, this grandiose idea, but you got to look in the communities and see the percentage and the data that speaks about. When you can speak to me with the data that indicates that there are more white women get an abortion than women of color, then I can say I might agree with the balance of power when it comes down to legislations controlling women and telling women you have control over your body. Granted, you do, but sometimes control don't begin at the end of a baby. It begins at the making of a baby.
Well,
and that's where the control does.
That black women do not have a monopoly on abortions. I believe
women of color.
Women of color don't have a monopoly on abortions.
Who
I believe
does?
that women all across the board have, at least in some respect, have gone out and had abortions. White, black, and everyone in between.
I would love to see that data. I would love for the legislators to actually pull up all the data that states that. Because when you make a piece of legislation, you have to do it based upon something. What was it? And who are the, as they say, who's the sponsor of these bills that come out? You got to look at the sponsors. You got to look at the condition. You got to look at where they're coming from, which community it abides in. When you make a piece of legislation, it's not for every state. But it goes from state to state to state and get other sponsors to be a part of what we call this piece of legislation without data and information.
Yes, but there was a federal mandate with respect to abortions. And, it's that type of misinformation and disinformation. And, one of the things that I remember hearing is that Black women is the most disrespected, the most hated creature on the planet Earth. We get blamed for almost everything under the sun. It is a very paternalistic, it is a very misogynistic, and quite frankly, it's racist in nature. And so many of our own folk have picked up this sort of racist understanding of what it means to have an abortion within our country, and as if Black women just sort of has a magic ticket, and we always want to wave this wand instead of us having our children, when there are so many Black mothers each and every day who we see who are taking care of their children and doing exactly what it is that they want to and need to be doing for their child, if that is the choice that they've made.
Got it. I'm granted, but there's a lot of things that fall into why women get abortion. Tell me, is it economics? Is it education? Is it housing? What are the situations that push women into getting abortion? And that's a conversation you might have to have with a group of women in order for this to come to fruition, to really find out, because we do surface stuff when we write legislation, but we really ain't doing no deep dive. Why is the cause? Because 9 times out of 10 in the Black community, it's going to be all 3 of those issues that really pushes a woman to make a decision. I don't need this baby because I can afford it. I don't have nowhere to live. I'm not in the right relationship. It's a mishap, right? All of this stuff comes to part why people get I've never been there. I know why some, basically because I have sisters and aunties and stuff that went through some situations in their life, and I can only hear from their perspective. But I do believe that there's a difference in certain communities versus others on why situations happen. But I also believe that America has a genocide that's out for the Black community, and we fall for the okie doke.
Well, you know what? Maybe that could be the case across the board. We could look at that in criminal justice reform. We could look at that in our housing structure. We could look at it on a number of different levels. However, one of the things that I'm hearing is that you're saying that this is a societal issue that we are confronting, but you're putting it within the religious packaging to be able to decide whether or not these societal environmental issues that women may be making choices around, that if it bumps up against religion, then it's wrong and it shouldn't be done. And women shouldn't have the access or the ability to be able to engage in that if they so choose to. And so thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to speak to you today on behalf of Church and State. Again, I am Assembly Member Latrice Walker.
And I am Reverend Dr. Robert Waterman. And together we are Church and State.